Hello, welcome to another episode of Executive Suite. I'm your host, Thomas Braun, and today we have with us Claire Weerdt from Weerdt Consulting, and they're an M&A advisory firm. Claire, can you please give us a quick overview of the kind of M&A advisory services you supply?
Yeah, so I primarily do growth strategy and or market research, commercial due diligence support on both sides of the transaction. I don't do anything financial. Um, so for a startup, that would be something like a market sizing or maybe a go-to-market plan, financial model, or a financial spreadsheet. Or for a middle market company that might be looking at their roadmap, strategic portfolio. For a private equity company, that might be, doing some light market research, or helping firm up some of their hypotheses, et cetera, et cetera. I do most of my work on sort of a mid-market corporate level, where we're looking at, the strategic rationale behind mergers and acquisitions as part of a broader growth strategy, as opposed to just sort of purely transactional. So I do a lot of growth strategy on top of that.
Okay, and you've got an interesting background. How did you get into consulting to begin with?
Yeah, so I started my career in engineering. I love numbers, data. That's always been sort of my comfort zone. I went to get my MBA in finance to start learning the language of business, and then I went to work at McKinsey for 2 years to sort of ingrain that sort of business problem solving acumen. After I left the firm, I did some corporate strategy, at that point, it was sort of the height of the M&A boom, where there's just so many deals, and so I got involved in a lot of different commercial due diligence. And so I advise clients mainly on strategy, which often bridges over into M&A strategy or, sell side or, for startups, a lot of it is trying to get funding from investors by showing, positive growth trajectory.
Okay, and where did you get your MBA?
I went to the Sauder School of Business here in Vancouver, where I'm based.
UBC. Okay.
Mhm.
And I think that's the top ranked business school in Canada right now, isn't it?
Probably one of them. I really enjoyed my experience there. I learned a lot. I think you learn a lot during your MBA, but there's also some things that you really pick up after, and particularly at my time at the firm.
Right. So with your engineering background, you probably didn't have too much trouble with the courses on manufacturing processes and analysis and manage what do they call it? Managerial accounting, figuring out
Managerial.
if you should replace this machine with the other way around, a person with a machine, that sort of thing. Like, should we get a robot to replace this person? Somebody's got to figure that out. I always found that very difficult. I I uh, I found it hard, but you probably found it pretty easy because I guess you'd have to get really high marks to get hired by McKinsey out of the MBA program.
They say so. Yeah, apparently. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm kind of a number. I like numbers, right? I don't think I'm like any kind of savant. I didn't go to MIT or anything like that, but it's definitely, working as sort of an engineer is a kind of a practitioner of managing data, using data, pulling the correct insights out of data. But I think when you switch over to the business side from the engineering side, there are some things you have to unlearn, which is really interesting.
like what?
Yeah, so, when you work as an engineer, everything's very finite. You'll always get enough data. Maybe it'll be slightly imperfect. When you move into the business world, particularly when you're doing some of these analysis, the data is very imperfect, right? You're having to make decisions with very limited swaths of data. You really have to learn how to be 80/20 um, with that sort of thinking, particularly in market sizing. So I think a lot of technical people, when they move into this line of work, they have some advantages, but there's a lot of unlearning that has to be done at the same time, and a lot of level of comfort with something that might be, some data that might be not 100% correct. Or you have to learn to be really scrappy with sort of putting that data together, collecting it, analyzing it. Because and a lot of times when you're dealing with startups or middle market, we're working with limited budgets. So your ability to kind of be resourceful and pulling data sources from publicly available places, starts to become a lot more important than actually the ability to analyze it.
Hmm. Well, I was thinking when I saw on your website about the engineering background, one of the things I did think is that in China, like an engineering friend of mine was pointing out to me, in China, all of their leadership are engineers. That's their academic background. And it makes sense to them that you have an engineer running things. In France, their business schools are set up more like a faculty of engineering, and they view finance and financial analysis as sort of like a branch of engineering and mathematics. And there's a lot more quantitative analysis versus case study, which is, it's case studies interesting. I guess it's fun, but it actually came from the first dean of I think the Harvard Business School or something like that. The first business school, the dean was a lawyer, and so he adopted this case study framework, which many business schools have adopted, like Western. UBC, I think, is much more quantitative. You almost need an engineering degree to do well at it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot of, pros and cons, and I think diversity in thinking is really important too. Like I think anyone can kind of learn these things. The math isn't all that complicated. I still sometimes do case studies because case studies can be their own form of data, right? It's like, what can we learn? If we're working on a problem with a client, for example, like I was working with platform strategy, doing some platform strategy with a defense tech startup, and we pulled in platform strategy cases from Harvard, from I think it was like Instacart, DoorDash. And we're learning about how to start up a platform company by pulling in these case studies. So they become their own sort of form of data. I mean, they're not the whole picture, right? You want to take a multifaceted approach, but you can say, well, hey, here's 5 case studies. What can we synthesize from these? And sometimes you get some really interesting principles. That's why if you ever read, business books, they're always peppered with just a lot of different case studies. So I think it's um, I don't know about from a teaching standpoint, but from a sort of like, hey, we're trying to solve a problem, let's pull some resources standpoint, I think they can be super helpful.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed the case studies a lot more because my undergraduate degree's in history. It's kind of like a history lesson when you look at if it's a real case study. But I can throw a wrench into your engineering mindset here with a good one. An anecdote from the University of San Francisco, where I was doing a master's degree in law. I took venture capital law there, and we had a venture capitalist lawyer teaching the course. And the case study he gave us was interesting, and it was a huge crisis had befallen this company, and we had to take this home and come up with a solution for the next class. And we were given a number of choices. Which one of these options should the board of directors choose? One of them was delay and hope, and this is based on a real world case that happened, and that was the option they chose, and it turned out to be the correct option because they did nothing. And then just miraculously, 2 or 3 weeks later, the problem went away on its own. So there you go. Sometimes delay and hope is actually the best route. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, strategic decision making is really interesting because if you ever heard of the book Descartes' Error, it was about sort of how decisions are inherently emotional. And actually, if you take the emotion out of it, you just immediately go into analysis paralysis, particularly if they're two similar pathways. So I think when I work with strategy leaders in and around decision making, like we want like a certain amount of data, but sometimes too much data, and you quickly veer into that sort of analysis paralysis. So I think it's a little bit of a mix, and you can use some problem solving techniques, but at a certain point, you kind of have to like force an answer. Like you have to time box it. We're going to look at this for a month. We're going to do some high priority analysis, but then we need to make a decision after a month, right? So there's different ways you can kind of help make those decisions. But I do see it a lot, particularly people with my background, is there's a tendency to want to consume data, you know, myself included, where you want to just sort of, okay, let's analyze some more, let's analyze some more. So you have to like, you put together a structured approach where you're really wanting to limit how much data analysis you do. At some point, you're going to have to say, well, hey, this is not going to be, super influential to my decision. So I'm going to only look at these two things and then, make the decision from that. But
Okay.
it definitely
Well,
has its limitations.
yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you some questions about data and where you can get the kind of data that you need um, to do some of these analysis. Now, the thing that really caught my eye was, you know, what you're doing for startup companies, TAM analysis for startup companies. Do you mind if we jump in there and tell me about this PAM and TAM analysis across all of the different market segments?
Y- Yeah, the TAM analysis is really an important analysis for startups, and from an investor perspective, particularly with tech startups, they're using it a lot to determine how niche it is. So it's really important to have a good understanding of the right TAM. And of course, every startup wants to go to their investors and say, we have this $100 billion TAM. But sometimes when you look at the numbers, you find out you're actually in a pretty small market. And that can be kind of hard to kind of reconcile with and present to investors. But I think, if you just go through the steps, get quality data, and make sure you kind of show how you came to that data or that result, that typically resonates pretty well. I mean, sort of the four elements of a TAM analysis that I would usually go through is, number one is defining your market, right? So you want to make sure that TAM, total addressable market, is a real sort of market need. There might be a tendency to expand beyond it. But you really need to understand like what is the business that you're in, what markets can your product actually serve, and um, exclude. You don't need to go global. For example, if you're really just looking at the U.S. market, just limit it to the U.S. market. It you're not going to get a lot of extra value global, and it's going to take 50 times as much time. So set some guardrails around what you're looking at, and then
Yeah, depending on the product too. Like if it's hamburgers and French fries, then just stick to the United States.
well, but see, that's a harder one. How do you do the market size for hamburgers and French fries? Is it every calorie anyone eats could be hamburgers and French fries, or is it only people already buying fast food, or is it only be
It's
people
it's
buying
got to be
hamburgers and
fast.
French fries
Yeah, it's got to
together?
be fast and cheap, and the French fries have to be crispy.
Yeah, like what is
And the
actually
hamburger shouldn't be soggy, and I think then you can sell millions of them.
yeah,
So
yeah. But then
anyway,
so
I'm
that's
a
actually a really
hamburger
good
guy.
example for that. Sorry.
Yeah. So you're talking about the 4 points of the TAM analysis before I interrupted you. But can you tell us what the PAM is?
So that's PAM, that's potential addressable market. So that's when you're starting to look outside the confines of your TAM and you're starting to look
Uh-huh.
at, well, we could potentially get this market too, or if we
Oh,
expand, we could potentially get this market. And so if you can think about the TAM, I don't know if you've ever seen those circle diagrams where you've got one circle is the PAM, then you've got your TAM, then you got your SAM, SOM, and maybe you've got a sweet spot in there where you're really competitive. It kind of expands the further
ge-
you
yeah.
go, the more remote.
Geographically, yeah, expanding geographically or by market segment.
By sort of the distance of the market, right? Like, so let's say for, I don't know, McDonald's, they probably have a certain core market, which is their sweet spot, which is like high chance of winning, right? Then they have their SAM, the market they can actually service. Like, yeah, they might be buying burgers and fries in this small town, but if there's no McDonald's there, they're not going to service that market, even if it's a viable market. And then you have your TAM, which is maybe all burgers and French fries, and then your PAM, which is maybe I don't know, you include chicken wings in there too. It's like we want to win over chicken wing patrons to our burger model.
Okay. So now when I look at this PAM and TAM analysis across 12 end market segments, what do you mean by 12 end market segments?
Yeah, so that was an example I did of a organization that had a very novel technology that was applicable across a number of industries. So it was a
Okay.
specific, really cool construction type technology, but it was you could do it in rail, you could do it in wastewater. It was applicable across a broad
Right.
set of end markets.
Okay.
That's what I would
That's what
call
you
end
mean.
markets, like just industries, right? Like accounting software, you might have every end market industry could use it, right?
Okay. Okay. So now you've got here a result, right? That you did this PAM and TAM analysis, revealed nearly 100 billion in market value for this company. Client continues to be oversubscribed with investment despite challenging VC markets. So that really caught my eye. So if you're setting up a company, if you're going to start a company, should they be budgeting some money maybe for a report like this to help them raise money, especially if they're just not getting any traction in the financial markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly helpful. I mean, I'd have to give a lot of credit to the CEO of that organization that I worked with. He's a sort of a serial entrepreneur. Um, I think that it'll certainly help to get something professional. And I think it's something where you probably want to get something third party and what I would call defensible. Um, it doesn't have to be a lot of budget. We can kind of do like, low five figures kind of thing, sometimes even less. Um, and as long as it's just sort of, you know, defensible and clear. And I think getting a third party to do that, if you're like an investor, like, hey, we got a second opinion on our TAM. We're confident in it because I think there's probably consensus that most startups will try to maximize that TAM. But if you really want it to be believable, I think getting that third party sort of stamp of approval, particularly if it's done in a way that's um, what I would call defensible, which is if someone reads it, they can actually go and recreate it themselves. They see all the assumptions that you made. They see, okay, there's, this many people in this occupation, and you added this, and then you took this factor, and then this is what you got. I can actually see how you got to that I can believe that, right? Uh, whereas sometimes if you pull from a market report, it's like you could be right, or it depends on how the level of accuracy you need as well.
Okay. So you would produce a report, I guess. Like, can you give me an idea of how long something like this is?
Some products are going to be in like a complex array of end markets. But usually for a market size, we're talking like maybe a 5 to 10, PowerPoint presentation, and then really the core of the model is in Excel. Like I've done sort of Excel models, market sizes, and we had maybe like 3 or 4 slides, but that model was very robust. This is one I did for a private equity firm, and we actually looked at the size of the market per city. Um, so we had like a metro area breakdown of what this market size was, because that was key to their sort of roll up strategy. But you can end up having a pretty substantial model. And then, yeah, 5, 10 page PowerPoint decks about it.
Wow. So, and this is where I want to bring you back to data is okay, well, then where do you get the data for this sort of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of people think you need to pay for data. There's a lot of free data out there. I don't think I used a little bit of data behind a paywall for this because we had it, but you can get a lot of different statistics depending on your end market. You can get populations, you can get demographics, you can get there's a lot of industry associations or government. I mean, the U.S. Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can start with some of those numbers and sort of back into you know um, your market size. A good example is like if what you're selling is B2B and it's some percent of revenue, you can just find out what's the total revenue, what's that distribution, and then multiply that by that factor, right? Um, but I find like industry associations, like I was doing a market size the other day for safety equipment. I was able to find how many physicians were operating by specialty in the United States to sort of calculate the market for that safety equipment per physician in the United States. It was very accurate numbers. I think it was the American Medical Association or something like that, AAMA or something. Um, but yeah, it's really great data, and if it comes from an industry association or if it comes from government, it's a lot more defensible, right? It's like, oh well, Statistics Canada said this, and then I applied
Right.
this factor. It's relatively true. You can also ask ChatGPT for data sources, and sometimes they have some pretty good ideas.
Right. So you're going right to the source. Because I've noticed with just about any industry, there's always so many different reports that will pop up if you do a search on Google about a market size. And they will give you a teaser, but then want $1,500 for the report or $2,500 for the report. And when you start to look at the teaser that they give you from two or three different companies, they can be completely different. And so then you wonder, well, who's right and who's wrong? You can just go for the high one, I suppose, that is sort of self-serving. But like you said, if somebody were to then dig down, they might find out that, well, you're going on the largest circle, not the TAM, but the PAM or whatever. Um, so anyway, that's why I wanted to ask you about that because for so many different industries, I just thought, well, how do you actually find out what the real number is? Yeah,
Yeah, and I think there's some situations where those types of reports might make the most sense. Like if you're just looking for a broad overview, you just want to understand the space a little more, maybe for your own purposes. But I think when we think about investors, like they're usually relatively sophisticated. Particularly, if you've worked at McKinsey or Bain, a lot of these companies don't really use those reports as much. So they may see sort of a ground up analysis from like source data to be more reputable, because I have also seen, I interviewed some of the I think it was like, maybe PitchBook or S&P or a few of those, and I was interested in their market data, but then you ask them, well, where did this data come from? And it's not clear, right? So you want to be able, if there's questions on like, hey, where did you get this data? What were your assumptions? I think it's always better to have answers to that.
for sure. So now, if I'm a startup company and I'm interested in getting a report done that it, I guess weaves in a lot of these other things like general go to market, like new market entry strategy, product line strategy. That to me, that's going to be woven into the TAM analysis. Or is it? Like, do people have to get 4 different reports, or is it all included?
Yeah. So usually what I do is, at the beginning of connecting with the client, there's a problem statement worksheet, right? Which is what is the core problem you're trying to solve? If it's strategic, it's usually some mix of, where to play, how to win. If it's for investors, it's usually, hey, we've got, this presentation, we're missing these pieces, we just need a TAM analysis. That's usually when it's like a one-off. But if you're looking at sort of a strategic growth analysis, it depends on, where you want to grow. What type of growth strategies are you looking at? And so you have to go through this sort of problem solving, uh, process. But often what would be included in sort of a broad report would be some mix of like a commercial due diligence, for example, would be some mix of the market size, what are the trends in the market, what's driving the market, what's the competitive landscape, and who are the players in the market today? How are they segmented? Who are the customers? How are they segmented? What do they care about? Recently I've been getting into more sort of market testing. Like, hey, we want to bring this product to market. Like, can we do a survey to kind of test it? Do we want to get to know our customers' needs a little more? Who are our true competitors? A lot of those types of questions fold into sort of like what I would call like a strategy output. Um, for startups, often like that might be depending on how well capitalized you are, it might not the juice might be not worth the squeeze for you, but, at the same time, you can, there's always like a lighter version of something, there's the middle market version, there's the Fortune 500 version, and there's the startup version. And you can get really sort of scrappy and, hey, I think we just need to kind of, look at these three things to solve the problem that you have. If that makes sense. I don't know if I answer your question.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you sit down and you scope out the report, and then that will determine how long it'll take and how much it'll cost. But can you give me an idea of what people should be thinking about budgeting for something like this? If you're a startup company, you've got one product, there's really only, one segment for it, but it's a large market, and they want to get a good TAM analysis to support capital fundraising and stick it in their business plan and their pitch deck. What would I have to budget to get something that's fairly good quality so that, like you said, any investor or fund manager who's reading it, by the time they get to the end of the report, they're like, yeah, okay, I'm convinced this, is is a great analysis.
I mean, it depends on the complexity of the market. I mean,
Mhm.
you're probably looking at paying a little bit more than you might for a report. But, I mean, I've done TAMs as low as like a couple thousand, and then they certainly go up from there depending on the level of complexity. Like say, once we have 12 end markets, we're looking at maybe 10, 15. But usually that's sort of the range that you're going to be playing in. And it also
Okay,
depends
great.
on like what you want to show with that TAM too, right? Like, so you have to, I try to understand really what the objectives are with it to make sure it's sort of tailored to the client's needs.
Okay, well, that's pretty good news.
Like
It's
that's me. I don't
affordable.
know. Maybe I'm undercharging.
With startup companies, they're pre-revenues. Money is a non-renewable resource for them. Maybe even if you only spent 2 or $3,000, you'd get something that will help push you over the edge, and help you raise the capital that you
Yeah, and
want.
but I mean, hopefully, when you do the market size, it shows a significant market. But sometimes I find that there's potential for leaders to be surprised with the TAM, that it maybe comes out a little lower than they had hoped.
Yeah,
Um,
that doesn't
so
surprise me.
yeah, so I mean that can be like you don't want to pay for that type of answer, but sometimes it's a technical thing, right? It's a third party review. I'm not trying to make the market bigger. I'm not trying to make it smaller. I'm trying to get accuracy.
You know what?
And
They're better off hearing it from you in private than waiting until they file something with the SEC and they get the same question from the SEC saying, "Really, you have no competition, and your market's this, $100 billion, and there's no competition or whatever that they put in there." So, yeah, at some point they've got to get red pilled on what reality is, and they are better off hearing it from a consultant, private. They don't like the report, they can stick it in the filing cabinet, then, or they can maybe it'll help change their strategy to one that will actually work. Just save them from wasting their time.
yeah, and I really try to make my market sizes defensible, right? Like I've
Uh-huh.
presented these market sizes to a number of different types of discerning investors, private equity, corporate. So I really try to craft something that's going to, someone's going to look at it and it's going to be hard to, criti- uh, be critical of it because
Okay.
it's just all outlined, they can see exactly how we came up with it. Right. And that's what I call defensible, right? I really want to make it defensible when I put something together.
Did you have anything that was still on your mind, or you just wanted to say in wrapping this up?
And thanks for inviting me on here. I've really enjoyed it. Not sure if I can share a link. I have a newsletter. Find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat with startups, even if it's just a conversation. So thanks again, Thomas, for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I'm convinced. Thank you for watching this again. And till next time, bye for now.
Okay.